The Exorcist is a 1973 American supernatural horror film based on a demonic possession and a Catholic exorcism. I'm Mark Beale. I'm a spirit releasement therapist and trainer. So I'll analyze and explain the movie from my professional point of view, and I'll compare it to my experience with real-life therapeutic case studies. I'll look at key scenes and themes to sort out the facts and fiction and identify exaggerations and use of cinematic license, and I'll do this with full spoilers. The Exorcist is a movie. It's not a documentary. Yet it is an extreme version of some real-life situations that can happen and that have been experienced by me, some of my colleagues, and some of my students. Now, the reality and the behavior of some of these extreme clients can be determined by the variations within the clients themselves and by the management of the clients by the therapists. So I'll look at Regan as if she's a case study and critique some of the techniques and management of her case. So I'll look at what was done well and what was done poorly compared to the way that we deal with these kind of situations in real life. The first act of The Exorcist focused on a diagnosis. It shows the daughter Regan displaying symptoms escalating as she's assessed first by physicians, then by psychiatrists, then by a psychiatrist priest, Father Karras, and finally by the exorcist specialist priest, Father Merrin. Regan progressively complains that she's talking with Captain Howdy via an Ouija board. Then an entity speaks through her who claims to be in contact with the spirit of Father Karras' mother. Then an entity acts as a demon and speaks through her. Finally, the entity takes her over completely and claims to be the devil himself. The first half of the movie sees them try to identify what's going on to therefore determine the appropriate treatment. So they go to the physicians, who naturally study the physical body and look for chemical or physical irregularities in the brain. They come to a dead end. So we move to the psychiatrists who study the mind and look for known conditions with known effective responses. Now, there are an unlucky 13 psychiatrists in this scene who diagnose her as delusional and recommend confinement and probably heavy medication. In real life, this is probably where the story ends. She'd be confined, medicated, and the story would come to a conclusion. But the mother feels that there's something paranormal. The psychiatrists work with this and even recognize that religious beliefs can play a part as a causative condition. The psychiatrists actually propose exorcism as a stylized ritual that has worked because of force of suggestion. They don't buy into the religious aspects, but they don't dismiss it either. Now, this is fair enough, and it doesn't matter too much that they don't believe totally in the spiritual underpinnings as long as they're willing to go through some of the ritual themselves. The important thing is that they're pragmatic and they are willing to do whatever it takes to get a result. Spiritual releasement therapy is somewhere in the middle between a religious and a scientific approach. It is essentially non-secular and pragmatic also, so we're willing to work with a combination of people's religious beliefs and to use the power of suggestion. So we're flexible enough to use whatever tools are required in the moment to get the outcome for our client. The mother now moves on to the priests who study the soul. These priests too have a strict protocol before diagnosing a demonic possession and therefore allowing an exorcism. This is fair enough too. The mere act of saying that somebody needs an exorcism is implying and giving the suggestion that there is a demonic possession, and you're affirming that, which, if it's not completely correct, can have negative consequences for the person. Now, the term exorcism is often associated with a long-standing Catholic practice of casting out demons. Yet many other religions and traditions around the world have similar rituals that also revolve around expelling spiritual entities, but they may not use the words exorcism or demons. Spirit releasement therapy itself, which is what I practice, has developed over the last 100 years or so by a small group of psychiatrists. It takes a largely secular and therapeutic approach and has a precise set of terms to define the issue, and these do not include exorcism or demons. Instead, we identify two specific types of spirits. So instead of a demon, we'll say there's an earthbound spirit or a dark force entity. Instead of an exorcism, we'll say there's a releasement. Firstly, earthbound spirits. They used to have a human body, but their spirit did not pass fully into the light, so they remain earthbound. In hypnosis, we can connect with these entities and communicate with them to discover the mental and spiritual cause of their bounds and release them. Earthbound spirits can be involved peripherally with dark force entities, as we will see in The Exorcist, but usually these are separate. And sometimes these earthbound spirits can be called ghosts, and sometimes they even have good intentions. So I cover earthbound spirits in my reviews of movies like The Sixth Sense, The Others, Last Christmas, and Ghost Stories. Secondly, there are dark force entities. These are spirits who have never had a human body and are servants of a dark master, who puts them to work, negatively affecting the lives of living people. We can also connect with these entities and communicate with them to help them realize that they themselves are being deceived and they are being negatively affected by carrying out the orders. We take a compassionate approach to help these dark force entities be free, and in the process they release from our client. Now, the psychiatrists raise an important point of the role of suggestion. We should not tell someone they have a dark force entity attached. In spirit releasement therapy, a client tends to first explore all medical and psychiatric possibilities in the first instance, and still only proceed with a spirit releasement if they can persuasively demonstrate that an approach that deals with a dark force entity is the last and only reasonable option. In spirit releasement therapy, we don't diagnose, and we don't have to state definitively that it's an objective, externally existing spiritual reality. You could see it as a metaphor from the subconscious mind, or an ingrained religious belief, or a psychological reaction. What matters is that we work with whatever beliefs our clients bring, and we don't need to generate consequential beliefs afterwards. We simply observe a wide variety of people produce a uniformity of symptoms and a uniformity of productive response to our techniques. So essentially, we're happy to do what works to get to a therapeutic solution, and we can leave the conclusions up to the client or guide them to ones that are empowering and assist their well-being. I only really need two personal empowering beliefs, which are: one, people consistently report levels of dark force entities, so it's simply productive to work with their own inner descriptions and their raw experiences. The second empowering belief is that in ultimate reality, the truth is light. Darkness itself is an illusion. So while there may be dark force entities at one level, there is also night at one level. Yet ultimate reality is the sun is always generating light. So I'm no more afraid or confused by dark force entities than I am by the sun setting. The sun will rise again tomorrow. And in the meantime, I know that it is still shining even as it sets, according to my subjective perspective. I'm in full rapport with the sun, and I'm in full rapport with the techniques that I learn and teach in spirit releasement therapy. So I can implement them with this certainty, with this consistent calm, clarity, confidence, and peace. Holding these two empowering yet non-dogmatic and relaxed beliefs enables me to deal with supernatural situations in a natural, easy way. Now, these empowering and relaxed beliefs and states become increasingly absent in The Exorcist, and the story becomes increasingly extreme and fictional. Within dark force entities, there is a vast spectrum. So we can look at three layers of DFEs. Firstly, there are mildly malevolent dark force entities, far less extreme or dramatic versions. They may have a fairly subtle or very minor effect on a person, such as creating a background sense of unease or a mild anxiety. They may almost be essentially asymptomatic, or a client may be so used to it that they think of it as fairly normal, and it's only after the process that they realize they feel better and remember what it's like to feel at peace, and these mild cases of dark force entities can be released quite simply. Secondly, some dark force entities are moderately malevolent. They may affect the client by amplifying their fear, anger, depression, self-destructive behaviors, or give them a sense of being blocked in life, or feeling uncomfortable in their own skin, or even feeling under a psychic attack, so it's hard for them to sleep or feel at peace. At first, they may seem very evil, particularly when we initially communicate with them, but when handled correctly, even these moderately malevolent beings can still be released relatively easily if you know what you're doing and have the proper training that I happen to give. Thirdly, on the spectrum, there are some dark force entities that are highly malevolent, but these are very rare. Yet I've had personally and know of some cases that can approach the levels illustrated in The Exorcist, though it does have some significant cinematic exaggerations. Now, there can be really extreme situations, but these tend to happen outside of the therapy room. And these can be due to a combination of exacerbating circumstances. So how do the most extreme cases arise? So what are the causes? And in this case, why is Regan, a 12-year-old girl, possessed? Some explanations or hints are given in the movie, and these hints do cover the real-life major causes of spiritual problems of this nature. And there are two. The first is involvement with the occult, and the second is drugs. So firstly, involvement with the occult. Regan talks with Captain Howdy via an Ouija board. Now this is a minor example of the occult. I still wouldn't recommend using it, but in real life, to get such an extreme result, I would expect someone to have a fairly long history in this life, doing practices like being an occult priestess, performing many mediumships, seances, evocation of spirits, demonology, Satanism, white or black magic or Wicca, witchcraft, or many others. So Regan didn't have the chance to do any of these, but people that do might find themselves in an extreme situation like this. Now, usually a lot of these practices will have been performed by people in this life. So for 12-year-old Regan, she hasn't had the chance to build up a 10-year history of doing these kind of practices. One possibility that could justify this is that in her past life, Regan may have spent 20 or 40 years or a number of lives doing these kind of things, and she may now be reaping the karmic seeds of her past life action. That is a possibility. Yet I would still expect in real life to have somebody have performed these actions in this life. So the key point about these practices is that at one stage, people consciously and actively engage with dark spirits, and their involvement often includes an explicit invitation to a dark spirit. Some people do these occult practices in order to try to gain some of their power, special knowledge, out of a desire for excitement, and sometimes people do this with good intentions. And we'll see Father Karras himself invites a dark spirit into himself, but without really understanding the risks of doing that. Either way you're dabbling with or going deep into the occult, this can have serious negative consequences and will often come for spirit releasement therapy to try to undo some of the things that they did do and consciously cause themselves. They may also come for past life regression therapy to undo or to heal some of their actions in past lives. Now, secondly, drugs can be a cause. So earlier in the movie, the physician asked if there are any drugs taken or in the house. Now, taking drugs can include within it mental illness, because there's a correlation between taking recreational drugs and mental illness. And if you have a mental illness, you'll often end up being given large amounts of pharmaceutical drugs. Now, if someone has a diagnosed psychiatric condition, they should stick with a psychiatric treatment and follow whatever medication they're given by their psychiatrist. Psychoactive drugs can induce intense spiritual experiences and possibly psychotic episodes. Drugs can also open the natural psychic protection mechanisms that creates a vulnerability that allows dark force entities to enter. So if you're having spirit releasement issues, or in fact if you're a spirit releasement therapist, I would strongly advise against taking any form of drugs. Now, a small amount of drugs can be a positive part of some people's spiritual awakenings. However, you need to be extremely careful with this and know when to stop. In real life, I've known personally of quite a number of people whose spiritual awakenings that were drug-propelled ended up resulting in psychotic episodes that required intense psychiatric treatment and pharmaceutical medication. So how does this apply to Regan? In real life, I'd not expect a young girl to have experienced extreme events due to drug-induced acceleration that would then make her vulnerable as a channel. So in real life, I'd only really expect an adult with massive amounts of involvement in the occult and psychoactive drugs to display anything like these kind of extreme symptoms. So now I'll break down some of these manifesting symptoms and look at what's possible in real life. So 1, a spirit speaks to the girl. Yes, this can happen in real life. It can happen in therapy, even with mild cases. In fact, this is how we know they're there. As a therapist, I can engage them in conversation, preferably with the client hearing them in their inner voice and then relaying what they hear to me, and then I reply back to that and the spirit can hear it. Now, another way of communicating with the spirit is where the spirit speaks not to the girl inside her mind, but through the girl. It takes over her voice box. Now, this can actually happen in real life as well, and it's more likely to happen in moderate cases, or moderate to strong cases. If this happens spontaneously, I would instruct the spirit to go back to that stage where they speak to me via the girl, and do not take over their voice box. We can say things like, I do not give you permission to speak through the girl. Speak to her in her mind, and she'll relay what she says to me. We can converse that way. You do not have permission to speak through her voice. In extreme cases, you may not be able to get them to step back. If this is the case, you may just have to continue on. The main thing is that you can continue to communicate with them and you'll be able to regain ground as we go on. Next manifestation is the girl curses. Now, this is absolutely true in real life in moderate cases as well. It's one of many power play attempts that we'll see. Often these dark force entities come out very aggressive at the start and they try to make the therapist take a step back. So sometimes you might ask your client, what is the dark force entity saying? And they'll be a bit embarrassed to say, but then tell you a stream of rude words and insults that they're throwing at you, the therapist. Now, the Exorcist goes into some really coarse language and some self-harm with the crucifix. Now, this for me is where it steps over the line into exaggeration, and it's something I wouldn't expect to see in a therapy room, but it may be possible in what would then be essentially a strong psychotic episode. And it's more likely to happen with a client that has a background of an obsession with religion or Satanism. So it's likely to arise from their psychology or their resistance to their early conditioning or religious upbringing. Another manifestation, the dark force entity says, the girl is mine. Now, this can actually happen in moderate cases as well. This is another power play where the dark force entity is making a claim and it's up to us to stand our ground and not accept their claim and stand up for their sovereign right. The claim they're making is a false claim and they know it. They may then start claiming about agreements and pacts. Yes, spirits can say this, and no, it's not correct. We debug this false statement. The process of how we do that is part of what I teach in Spirit Releasement Therapy educational videos. Now, in another case, a spirit speaks in a different voice. This can actually happen in therapy as well. The voice can sound quite different, though it is within the range of their own voice box. So the exorcist takes an extra step where it does an exact mimic of the other person, of the mother, of the priest. And for me, that's where it crosses the line. It's an exaggeration. Another manifestation, the spirit knows things it shouldn't know. Now, again, this can actually happen in real life, and it can happen in therapy with even moderate dark force entities. This can actually happen in a good way where spirit guides give a demonstration of spiritual knowledge and wisdom. So that's a light version of it. In this dark version, it's again done as a power play to gain the upper hand. They're still saying something that you already know, so what? Stick to the process of releasement. Another manifestation, the client's face appears to change. This actually can happen in therapy as well, but to a much lesser degree, and it may be a matter of perception, not an actual physical measurable change. In The Exorcist, the girl's face is wildly transformed and scarred, yet days afterwards her face looks healed and unmarked. Now, you can, in sessions, perceive large facial changes, but find afterwards they revert back to normal. So for me, this is actually more of a visual hallucination than a physical change, which is still no less remarkable. So yes, it can happen, but is it a really big deal that should freak you out? No. Again, stay calm and keep going with the process. So that's actually quite a lot of weird manifestations that can actually occur in real life. And all of these are quite weird and remarkable, but The Exorcist decided to go the extra mile and really cross the line into things which are not realistic. So first we have scratching sounds. The mother is scared and hears scratching in the ceiling. For me, there's no way that a spiritual entity is creating a physical effect in the sensory world with audible sound waves. The only explanation would be that it creates an auditory hallucination in the mind of the woman. So in this way, just as a client can hear a spirit talking and vocalize it, and auditory hallucinations in themselves can be valid. But it does not cross the line to when people are walking past my office, they don't think, oh, there's scratching sounds in there. Mark must be doing some more spirit releasement therapy and those spirits are scratching up the ceiling once again. So an inner voice, yes. An external scratching on the wall, no. And this applies for all the knock once for yes and twice for no. That is all a cinematic trope and does not occur in real life. The girl shaking and bouncing on the bed. Now, this is a wild exaggeration, and the myth may be built on the fact that when people are in a hypnotic or relaxed state, there can be a mild, involuntary twitch of the limb. Just as when we're sleeping, our legs may move as if we're running, but to take it to the level of not just bouncing on the bed, but the bed itself bouncing as if it's being lifted up by a spirit is a gross exaggeration and something that doesn't have any grounding in reality. The closest thing in real life could be spiritual practices that people do with shamans and drugs that people use like ayahuasca. And while this may be healing medicine for a large percentage of people, I am aware of cases where people have reacted negatively and have ended up convulsing and leaping from the floor and throwing themselves to the ground with a kind of super strength. So in The Exorcist, the girl has super strength. The physician explains and gives the metaphor that an adrenalized mother can lift a truck off a child, and I'd agree that this is a reasonable and possible principle. Although I've certainly never seen anything like it in therapy, which is a relaxed, controlled situation. The girl hits people. So I have said that being cursed out aggressively is fairly common. And there have been times where I thought that a client of mine might become physically aggressive as a way of backing up this verbal aggression. And I must admit that I did brace myself to physically defend myself. Yet in a therapeutic situation, I've never seen anyone cross the line and for this to happen in therapy. And my sense is that this is a line that couldn't or wouldn't be crossed in therapy. The approach of Spirit Releasement Therapy and the whole setup that we have is based in compassion. It's cooperative. So I've never experienced actual violence from a client, yet I wouldn't be that surprised if people who take an unsophisticated, blunt, confrontational, aggressive approach to trying to cast out demons and yelling and screaming and being non-compassionate and aggressive towards them, it wouldn't surprise me if a stray hand or arm connected with them. And I do know of instances in drug-induced spirit possession, which is again completely outside of therapy, that violent physical attacks can happen. And this is now verging again into a psychotic episode, and there can be times where a substantial amount of people are required to hold them down. Now, the child vomits. For me, this is another version of trying to hit somebody, but your arms are tied down. Well, this is a kind of dramatized version of spitting, which is also something that I've never seen in a therapeutic situation. So for me, all this vomiting is fiction and cinematic license. SRT practitioners do not need splatter guards. The child's head rotates. Is this kind of thing possible in real life? Well, literally rotating a head? No, that would be complete fiction. However, I have actually seen people do things that they're not physically capable of in normal life. As a person I was working with, I'd known them well. They were a yoga practitioner, but more into meditation because they weren't particularly flexible and they were not very good at the asana. So I knew for a fact they wanted to be able to sit in full lotus, but had never been able to achieve it and hadn't even really come close. So during a session, as a way of proving their spiritual power or trying to shock or scare me, the person sat up and said, I will show you I am in control of this person, and then did sit in full lotus. Watching this, I was a little scared they were going to blow out a knee, but in the end it was okay. So again, they were just trying to do a power play to shock or impress you with their power. So it is possible for people under this influence to do unusual physical feats. But sitting in full lotus is still basically anatomically possible. Levitating. This is pure fiction. This may be derived from that little truth that people can convulse, and this myth may also be derived from the truth that in a hypnotic state, people can often feel that the chair is moving when it's not moving at all. But as a therapist, you know this is their subjective perception. So I have a number of clients who've thought, can you please stop shaking the chair? Or am I floating above the chair? And I've had to say in both cases, I'm not touching the chair at all. It is not moving, but they're absolutely convinced it is. So for me, that's the basis of the myth. The spiritual world simply doesn't exercise that kind of influence on the physical world. For me, this kind of cinematic license is unfortunate because it's clear that this is just so silly and fictional that it casts doubt on some of the other spiritual principles that the film could convey that can happen and we can be prepared for. But when they layer in a few of these things that are quite ridiculous, then you end up throwing all of the other ones out as well. And the problem with that is when it turns out that some of them are actually true, people then get freaked out and think, well, if some of the moderate ones are true, maybe they will be able to levitate the bed, and the therapist loses their calm and control and runs screaming from the room and becomes afraid. All of these manifesting signs, that's all that they're trying to do, to show some sort of power so that they look more powerful and you feel weak in comparison. All we have to do is stay centered in our power and follow the process that I teach, and we do not have a problem. The only problem that we have is if we give away our power and overestimate theirs. So we've gone through the diagnosis and the manifesting signs. Now we come to the treatment. For treatment, we have the psychiatrist who uses hypnosis. Now, this is accurate. In real-life spirit releasement therapy, we'll use hypnotic states in order to bypass the conscious mind and access and communicate with the superconscious of our client and with any attached spiritual entities. Now, you see here his arm is up as part of an induction that he would have used but was not shown on screen. Now, this is accurate in real life. People do use this kind of induction. So he's correctly using hypnotic inductions. However, almost everything else he does in this session is not necessarily inaccurate, but unskillful and unadvisable. He addresses the entity inside directly, but there's no need to say that you two are hypnotized. That doesn't make any sense. The point of the hypnosis is to access and communicate with the spirit, not to hypnotize the spirit. What he's implying is that you are hypnotized, therefore you are under my control. Now, we're not trying to confront and control them. We're trying to discuss with them to educate and inform them that the best thing for them to do is release and let go our client. We can use persuasion. This "you're under my control" stuff is a bit silly. Now, the other thing he does, which is inadvisable, is that he asks the spirit to come forward and speak through Regan. I wouldn't advise this. I would say you do not have the permission to take over the vocal cords of Regan. Stay in the background. She is quite capable of relaying to me whatever you say to her in her head. You're giving the spirit too much power and authority. So on one hand, he's trying to say, I control you because I've hypnotized you. But on the other hand, he's handing over control, allowing the entity to get too much influence on the client, not recommended. Once it comes forward, he doesn't seem to know what to do. A key factor in good hypnosis is rapport. Rapport between the client and the therapist, and the rapport of the therapist within themselves, and the therapist's rapport with their own technique. In this case, the therapist doesn't look to be in rapport with any of these elements. He's unsure of himself. He doesn't know what to do, and he doesn't get results. In contrast, the priest and psychiatrist Father Karras, initially anyway, has much better rapport with himself and his techniques. He starts off calm, holding some authority and leading the conversation. This is the calm confidence and authority we want. But soon he is drawn into the entity's use of secret knowledge about Karras's mother's spirit. Now, I've already mentioned that this can happen in real life. Dark force entities can interact with earthbound spirits and then get unusual information. He should have known that and been prepared for it and been unshaken by it. So that's an error of technique on Karras's part. When Father Merrin comes in, he rightly warns him that he should not react and not be drawn into this. He sees through the power play and says, don't give away your power. When Merrin sees that Karras cannot maintain his powered center, he rightly removes Karras from the room. Now, when he first arrived, he told Karras, avoid getting drawn into their conversations. We may ask what is relevant, but anything beyond that is dangerous. He is a liar. He will like to confuse us. This is true in real life. This is another attempted power play. It's up to us to lead them, not to be led by them. We have our rituals and techniques. We need to stick with them, to use these to take the lead, and have them respond to our questions and follow our directions, not let this get flipped the other way around. Merrin here has an inner rapport with himself, in contrast to Karras, who lost those qualities. Father Karras tries to brief Father Merrin on the case and go into the three personalities, as if they're still treating this as a psychiatric problem of split personality disorder. Father Merrin stops him cold and says, there is only one. That's completely correct. This is no longer a psychiatric problem with a psychiatric solution. This is a spiritual problem requiring a spiritual understanding and a spiritual resolution. Now, Karras might say rightly, but there are multiple spirits, and in there is the earthbound spirit of my mother, and there are major and minor demons. This may also be true, but the root cause is that there is one significant overriding dark one. Any attempts to understand and access complexity within is part of a power play by the demon to divide and conquer your attention. Father Merrin is right to focus on the one singular force. It rang true to me when Merrin came in as a boss with a calm, a clarity, and a confidence. He could have come in with a bit more peace, but it quickly began to ring untrue for me. He too was drawn in to the power play. He became angry and he lost his temper. It was in this moment that he was lost. They get drawn into the energy of confused, chaotic, nervous, and angry shouting. By taking a confrontational approach, they're drawn into the world of the dark force entity, and it's here they are lost. You have to stand your ground. Maintain a state of calm, clarity, confidence, and peace with persistence and patience, and with more interactively leading and with more compassionate techniques than these guys displayed. He just needed to retain his calm, clarity, confidence, and peace. The clarity means not being confused and drawn into the games. The confidence is understanding the truth that the ultimate power in the universe is light and that darkness is ultimately an illusion. The calm is not being drawn in emotionally and losing your temper. The peace is knowing that this too shall pass. The demon or dark force entity will throw whatever it can at you to try to disturb your peace. If you stay centered in your peace, eventually it'll realize that you hold the high ground and they cannot win. The dark force entity will eventually break when they see that you never will. There is no inherent external darkness if you maintain the peace of love, light, wisdom, and compassion within you. Then there's nothing to be angry at or fear. If something can trigger anger or fear in you, it's your own dark emotions that can be exercised and released, so you can perceive accurately the ultimate truth of the light. Here, first Merrin, then Karis is overtaken by their own frustration and anger, and that is fatal. Now, I would not expect this to happen in real life. For me, this is the cinematic convention of the horror movie, where you have to have a horrifying end. In real life, dark force entities are just not that powerful, or they only have the power that you concede to them, and I would expect Merrin to know that, and I would expect him to win in real life. We do get to a resolution, but it's one where Karis invites. Karis also cracks and invites the spirit to take me. The spirit then leaps at this chance, jumps out of Regan and into Karis, who then jumps to his death, sacrificing himself to save the girl and take the spirit with him. In real life, it does make sense that the dark force entity could enter into Karis. This is the well-intentioned version that paves the way to hell. This is a version of interacting with the occult and inviting a spirit to enter into you. Some do it trying to get dark powers, some do it trying to heal others. Either way, it's a bad idea, don't do it. So it makes sense the DFE could enter Karis. It doesn't make sense to me that he would invite it. He should know the underlying principles and know this is something you simply never ever do. The invitation to release from the client because they can attach to you instead is an unskillful method. It's unnecessary and it doesn't lead to an ultimate therapeutic resolution. It just passes the problem from one being to another. In real life, people do this with all layers of the spectrum of dark force entities, from the mild to the moderate, and in any case, it's never a good idea and will have long-term negative consequences. In real life, I don't see the spirit being released or defeated by dying along with Karis. I'd expect it could jump back into the girl if it wanted to. The logic would be that the entity left Regan simply because its goal all along was to lure in these priests and kill them, so its job was done. From this viewpoint, Regan was never the target, and Karis didn't win by saving the girl. He fell into the trap and was defeated. And looking back, this had been pre-shadowed. In real life, I would have expected both priests to have been able to fairly easily maintain an air of calm, clarity, confidence, and peace, to protect themselves as well as to help their client get to a therapeutic resolution. This is partly because in real life, some of the manifesting symptoms simply would not have been present, which would have made it easier. And they should be aware of more advanced techniques to deal with these entities, which I'm sure they would have been in real life, but were not depicted. So we got all of the scary manifesting symptoms, but we didn't learn a lot about how to therapeutically work with these dark force entities. But that is something that I teach in my educational training courses. Now, since I wrote this review and explanation, I actually did some research, and I've since learned that in real life, this movie happens to be based on a book that's inspired by newspaper articles from 1949 in the Washington Post that covered the exorcism of Roland Doe, a 14-year-old boy. In this case, it was reported that there were a group of priests who carried out a series of exorcism rituals. Now, in real life, it resolved when they finally called on the Archangel Michael, who in the Bible did defeat the fallen angel Satan, and this allowed them to release the spirit of the boy. In the process, none of the priests died, none of them were possessed by a dark spirit, and the boy and the priests both went on to live unremarkable lives. So the actual real life ending makes sense. Other evidence or information about this case is limited, and I wouldn't rule out pathology or deception by the boy in question, especially since they stick to the moving and levitating bed story and the violent outbursts. Nevertheless, it has enough elements that match up to real life to make it a good basis as a talking point for real life cases. So overall, The Exorcist is interesting in dramatic cinema, but it greatly overestimates the power of the dark force entities, and it greatly underestimates the ability that people have to deal with these issues and get to a therapeutic resolution. The most terrifying part of the movie for me was the graphic medical blood-splattering examinations. In real life, there are techniques to learn and practitioners to visit that can help in a much more skillful and easy way, with a constant calm, clarity, confidence, and peace. So tell me in the comments, did you resonate with The Exorcist at a spiritual level? Have you experienced a mild, moderate, or extreme version of a dark force entity or spirit attached to yourself or another person? Are you a spirit releasement therapist or client yourself? And do you have a story that relates to or reminds you of anything in The Exorcist? Feel free to share any of your stories in the comments below. And if you've got any questions about some of the principles behind spirit releasement therapy or spirit attachments, then ask them and we can continue the discussion in the comments below. If you found this video too entertaining, check out my educational videos on YouTube or at my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute. I have foundation courses to learn about hypnosis, hypnotherapy, past lives, spirit releasement, and I have certification courses to gain experience in these fields and become qualified through extensive assignments and one-to-one video calls that we have taking you through every step of the process. If you're interested in online sessions in past life regression or spirit releasement therapy, check out my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute, to book an online session. Check out some of these other videos that cover past life regression, spirit releasement therapy, between lives therapy, hypnosis and hypnotherapy, all based on other spiritual movies. Thanks so much for watching.